Hi and welcome. This is Police Stories Podcast. This is episode 55. It's a continuing series of short stories about my 28-year career in the police in the UK. We've covered quite a bit already. Welcome if this is your first time, or hi again if you're coming back. Hopefully you're following the series. Hopefully you're enjoying it. And we're going to talk today about, of course, once again, another unpleasant subject. There isn't many subjects that are pleasant in this world, unfortunately. If you remember, I just got onto the dive team in the Met, based out of Wapping in London, near Tower Bridge, and I just really started on the diving career, completed my course, my 8-week course at Newcastle. So I was now officially a commercial diver, but also a police diver. And of course, once I turned up, having completed that, I imagined that I had it cracked. And I think we touched on it on the last episode, that the reality is, this is when the sort of training and the learning starts. You don't go on that course, come back and be some sort of a ninja warrior diver that knows it all. Yes, you've got a good grounding, you're a safe diver, and you understand the the sort of technical aspect and the theory of it, but putting that into practice, of course, is the challenge for sure. And on my first dive, as we talked about last week, it didn't go brilliantly, and I was a little bit disheartened, to be honest with you. It was very clear water, and both the sort of sergeant and the supervisor were able to watch and see that I just wasn't doing it right. They could tell instantly from the bubbles that I wasn't in the right position. It was a bit frustrating because they kept telling me to reset and try again and things, and it seemed fine to me, and I couldn't understand why I couldn't get this right. But the reality is, it's like anything that you start off doing. It's going to take some time. And in fact, we had a sit down, myself and the sergeant, who was a real character, became a good friend of mine, but certainly I was a bit nervous of him to start with. He's a pretty straight talking guy, and left me in no doubt as to where I fitted into the team. I think I was something new for the team as well, because everyone else, perhaps in the past had been sort of tough guys, alpha males, and perhaps that wasn't me. So I'm not sure they knew what to make of me, but hopefully by the time I left there that I'd done all right. But yeah, he sat me down and said, look, it's going to take you a year to get the hang of this. I don't expect you to be a competent diver for a year. And certainly at that point, I was thinking, that's crazy. I've just done my course. I've passed. I'm qualified. I know everything, but of course I didn't, So he was absolutely right. It was at least a year, maybe longer, until I really felt like I was getting my head round what I was going to do. He had a very specific way of running the team. It generally worked. As I say, it perhaps wasn't quite how I'd worked before, so it took a little bit of adjustment from me. And in fact, the classic thing that came across to me was fairly early on. I've talked about, we had a dive truck, a big sort of HGV truck that was fitted out for us divers in the back, with seating and lighting and a changing area and a toilet and what have you. And we kept all our dry suits, and all the equipment was kept in lockers sort of outside that we access from the outside of the vehicle. And we had various things in there. So we'd have, boxes of rubber gloves that we would put on underneath our wet gloves prior to starting a dive. We had something called Jollop, which is this horrible sort of slimy lube stuff that you'd put on your wrists and maybe on your neck. And when you were putting the dry suits on, it would just help your arms and your neck sort of slip into those very tight seals, to maintain the fact that they were waterproof. And they didn't leak, mostly. I mean, it did happen sometimes, but obviously this stuff would run out and need replacing. And I remember early on when I started on the team, we run out of gloves. We came to the end of the box of gloves, and it seemed simple, but this is how it was different on the team. And I grew to, really enjoy it, because everyone started working the same. People ask me regularly throughout my career, what's the best team you ever worked on? And 100%, it was the dive team, because when they were working well, they were a well-oiled machine. Later on, we'll talk about, I became a dive supervisor, and when I got to the site and briefed the team, and I would give out the roles, so, you're diver one, you're diver two, you're his attendant, you're the comms man, I gave out the sort of roles. you then didn't have to sort of explain the roles or sit people down and say, right, what I want you to do is this, and can you get that, and you stand there and you say this and you do this. Everyone knew their role, and it didn't matter which role you gave them, they knew it. It was such a well-oiled machine. You know, I gave a briefing, I gave the roles out, and that was it. You just sat back and everyone went off and did what they needed to do. And you hardly ever had to then say, oh, have you got the so-and-so? Oh, no, I forgot it. You know, it just didn't happen. Well, of course, it did very occasionally, but generally, you know, it was a really slick operation, very professional. Although, as we'll hear perhaps towards the end of this, we did like a bit of banter and some tomfoolery, you know, some jokes, and we'll talk about those perhaps towards the end, depending on how the time goes. But early on, yeah, so the box of gloves ran out, you know. I went to see the sergeant who was on there and said, oh, Sarge, just so you know, the gloves have run out, you know. And, of course, I magically expected him to go, all right, I'll get some, you know. And he turned it around straight away and said, OK, the gloves have run out. What are you doing about it? And I was, oh, well, I've told you, you know. So, and he said, yeah, OK, but what are you doing about it? He said, don't come telling me, you go and get more gloves and bring them on the truck. Don't expect anyone else to pick it up for you. If everyone does this, we'll be, you know, a good team. So I was like, okay, right. So a few weeks later or days later, or whatever it was, you know, we ran out of Jollop, this horrible Luby stuff, which of course we kept back in our storeroom. Same thing, oh, Sarge, we've run out of Jollop. Okay, what are you doing about it? And I was like, oh, right, okay, yeah, I think I'm getting this now. So I won't even bother telling anyone we've run out of stuff. I'll just go and get it and replace it. And it sounds simple and it sounds obvious, you know, but it's really something that makes a team work. You know, if everyone, the instant they see something, you're short of something, you need something, no one needs to ask anyone or tell anyone, they just fix it. And I have to say it worked very well, and it was a bit of a light bulb moment for me in terms of probably daily life, to be honest with you. It's the same, you know, at home. My wife might disagree, but, you know, the toilet roll's running out, I'll replace it. The coffee's low, I'll fill it up. You know, I don't rely on other people to do those things for me. Perhaps I'm getting a bit philosophical here, I don't know. But yeah, so the team ran very well as a result of that. So we're going to talk about body recovery now. Obviously, a little health and safety warning here. Unpleasant subject. You know, if it's not for you, then perhaps this isn't the episode for you, or this may not even be the podcast for you, because as you've heard on previous ones, you know, we've got pretty graphic. So I did at this point, I'd done a lot of body recoveries, both through normal policing, but also while I was on the Marine unit on the boats. You know, as I think I said before, there's 50 odd bodies a year come out of the River Thames, you know, for various reasons. So it's not for the squeamish. And I was pretty, you know, pretty used to dealing with those situations. But on the dive team, it's a whole nother level, you know, and there's a very specific way of doing it. And of course, the circumstances and the conditions, more importantly, in the water change massively. Now, it's actually a very difficult thing to do. And what it needs is a totally different style of search. So last week we talked about single diver jack stays as a way of methodically searching, for example, a canal or any piece of water, really, using a jack stay rope where you hold on with your hand as your point of reference and you search a sort of predefined area. And it's a way for the supervisor ensuring that you know, the area he or she wants searching gets searched. And equally, you can go then to an SIO, a senior investigating officer, who chances are has put you up to do this job. We've had a murder. Can you go and look for the weapon? We think it's in this canal. It's going back to him or her and saying, right, you asked me to search from here and here. It's very strict parameters. You know, we would agree at the beginning of the job where we were going to search. And they would leave, obviously, the how we were going to search up to us, because they're not the experts in that. We're going to search from here to here. At the end of it, we'll complete that and we will tell you, you know, either here is your weapon or it's not in there. But with bodies, very different. Now, obviously, they're a lot bigger, so that does make it easier. But you can't be so prescriptive. Now, you could search for them on jack stays, but bearing in mind before we talked about what a slow process that is, you know, 10 meters a day. Well, if you just think someone's gone missing in, you know, 100-acre lake, that isn't going to work. So what we do is something called an arc search. So I'll do my best to explain this. Bit more difficult using words alone, but I'll try, so bear with me. So if you imagine now, I think I've told you, the diver is always attached to a line of some sort. If you're on scuba, which was rare for us, but occasionally we did it, then you would have a rope attached to you. But mostly we dive surface supply, so that is an airline going from cylinders on the surface down to the diver, and that's what he or she breathes through. So you always had some form of lifeline attached to an attendant on the shore who was holding on to you. So what would happen is, let's say we turned up at a canal, for example, which might only be 20 meters wide, and our witness says that roughly in the middle, 10 meters out, that's where they saw the person go down under the surface. That's where they last saw them. So we would have a starting point. Now, we always had to take that with a pinch of salt, because witnesses could be drunk, it could be dark, they might not have great vision, they could be very stressed if they've seen something. There's all sorts of reasons why they get that wrong. And unfortunately, regularly we found victims way away from an area that we'd been sort of told that this person had gone in. But we'll keep it simple. 10 meters out, that's where they last saw them, roughly in the middle of the canal. Now, we'll rely on the fact we probably haven't got any visibility, because that was the norm for us. Occasionally you would get a little bit, but generally we'd expect to have none. So we'll work on that basis. So if I was the supervisor, I would get the attendant, I would stand by the attendant who has the line that's attached to the diver, and I would give them hand signals to get them to swim out. Let's say you can either swim them before the body, or where you think the body is, or beyond. So in this scenario, I would probably swim them out. They'd be on their back and they'd be finning out, watching me for hand signals as the supervisor. They would swim out, and I would put them maybe 5 meters past, further out than we thought the body actually was. And then I'd give them the thumbs down signal, because I want them to go down, leave the surface and go down to the bottom. So that would be communicated to me. The attendant would shout out, diver left the surface. I'd make a note of that, what time that happened, because it's very tightly controlled on the times you can be under the water and how long you're diving for. So they would get put down, they would tell me they'd hit the bottom, and then what would happen is I would get them to swim out as tight as they could. The attendant doesn't give them any line on the lifeline. They hold that line as tight as they can, and the diver swims away, constantly swims away gently from the attendant. So the idea is that line between the attendant and the diver is bar tight. It has to be bar tight or it doesn't work. And I would initially tell them maybe to arc left. So I would expect them under the water to turn slightly to their left, probably diagonally to their left, continue finning against the lifeline so that it's bar tight still, and they would then move in an arc, because they're attached to this tight line, off to the left. When they get to a point that I'm happy we've covered as far as we need to go that way, I will get the attendant to give them one strong heavy pull on that line, on that lifeline. They will then give one heavy pull back to tell me that they have received that and they've stopped. And now, because I've swum them past, further out than the area than I think the body is, I will get the attendant to pull that line in by 2 meters. We will then give the diver a signal, a pull again, to move off. And what that diver would do is he would now turn diagonally to his right. He would take up the slack in that line so that it's bar tight again, and then he would swim off against that line again in an arc, but now to the right. And then we basically repeat that. So they swim off as far as we want them to go. We give them a pull. We pull them in 2 meters. They turn to the left and they arc left. So can you see that we're working in effectively a fan shape, or an arc, hence the Arc Search name. And as long as they keep that line tight and we pull them in 2 meters each time, they're swimming along the bottom with both hands. They're basically sort of scooting along the bottom with their hands as far as both their hands will go as they swim along. Now, for a diver, it's physically very tough because you never stop finning. So you're swimming, you're finning, you're kicking against that lifeline all the time to keep it bar tight, as we've said, is so important. Because if you get any slack in that line, there's a possibility you could miss an area without us realizing. So very important for both the diver, the supervisor and the attendant to be watching that line and making sure that it is as tight as it goes. So we'd work the diver in this arc, and then hopefully after a period of time they would stop, and instantly, if you're watching the line, you'd see they've stopped. So they're either sorting out a snag or they think perhaps they're onto something. And normally then within a minute or two, you'd get the signal. So you get one strong pull, you give them a pull back, and then they'd give the signal 5 bells, which means I've had a find. I've found what I'm looking for. And obviously, if they were looking for a body, we would know they'd found a body. Now, we did have once a briefing where I don't think I was given the briefing. I was at the briefing, and somebody was describing the missing person we were looking for, or was telling us that we were looking for this person. They'd gone in the water, and one of the fairly new divers piped up, "What's the description of the male?" Of course, the supervisor cut in and said, "I'll tell you what, if you find anybody, just let us know, because we're hoping there isn't like 3 or 4 bodies in this stretch of water. You don't need their description, just find a body," which made me chuckle. And I think the diver felt pretty stupid. But yeah, so arc searches. So that's the theory of how an arc search works. Now, the beauty with an arc search is you can only use it when you're looking for something big. So it might work for, say, a car as well, for example. And it moves quite fast. You can cover quite a big body of water in a short time, and use very effectively. That was very much our bread and butter. Now, the big issue with this sort of dive as well is that if it's well publicised, then unfortunately what would quite often happen is in the summer, it would be kids, teenagers who have gone to cool off and jumped in a river, a canal, a pond, and then unfortunately get in difficulty and disappear and never seen again. But the problem is, invariably, they'll be local, the family will be local. What with social media, Facebook, etc., and friends, neighbours, somebody would tell the family that, little Johnny's gone missing. Of course, that would be conveyed to them, and they're going to come straight to the scene. So the added complication now is that you're trying to run a dive operation, and you potentially could have, 10 members of very emotional family standing with you. So you can imagine that should we have a find, they'll be asking questions. Should you have a find, you have to deal with it in such a sensitive way. You clearly, with the family there, cannot just grab hold of the body and bring him or her to the surface, in front of the distraught family. So we have a way of dealing with that makes it a lot more subtle. Another point to make here is that we were not like a rescue team. That didn't happen. We were always recovery. We just wouldn't get a heads up. It took us so long to get our kit together and get to a scene. There was only one occasion that we thought we might have a chance at a rescue, rather than a body recovery. And explaining that to family sensitively is quite a difficult one. We'll talk about that case I'm talking about in the future, where there was a possibility of a rescue. But so you can imagine we've got this added pressure of the family now with us, very, very upset. They may have lost their child or believe they've lost their child, and chances are they probably have. So what would happen is, and this is something certainly initially when you came on the dive team we trained for regularly to make sure we got it right, because obviously it's such a sensitive area. So what would happen is, now the 2 divers, bearing in mind the diver's diving alone, but there'd be a standby diver ready to come and assist them, as that was always the case. Those 2 divers would have got together prior to the dive starting and agreed who was doing what. So, for example, if I'm the diver, I would say, okay, I'm going to obviously go in, I'm going to do my arc search, and I'm hopefully going to find the body. And I say hopefully because ultimately we wanted to do our job. We didn't want to let people down. If we were told there was a body in an area, we wanted to find it. Now, you might think it's a big body, it's easy, but look out at your local pond or lake, a big one, even a small one, and imagine how you would go about finding a body in there, especially when you add in shopping trolleys, mopeds, fallen trees, old buildings if it's been flooded. There's all sorts of issues, and it really isn't quite as straightforward as you might think. So what would happen is, I'm the diver, and I've had this discussion with my standby diver. So I'd say, I'm going to find the body. Once I've found the body, I will maneuver myself in such a way that I will kneel down and I will put the body's head in between my legs. So I will kneel with my thighs either side of his or her head. And what that does is, when I then give the signal 5 bells, I've had a find, instantly the supervisor will send in the standby diver to assist me. Now, that standby diver will bring down a very large fiberglass or plastic body tray. It's a stretcher effectively, and that stretcher has a number of seat belts. I think it was 4 seat belts that go across the body, to hold them in place. So the standby diver coming down the line, he'll follow down my airline to find me. Because bearing in mind, this is totally black water. You cannot see anything. And it could be 10 meters deep, you know, so it's quite a body of water. He will follow down his lifeline until he reaches me. Now, my lifeline attaches pretty much under my armpit. So as the standby diver gets to me, and bearing in mind, he's carrying a 6-foot long plastic heavy tray in his other hand, he will know that that airline, when it finishes and it gets to me, is on my armpit, basically. So he'll know where he is. Now, to help orientate himself, he knows, I've already told him, I'll be kneeling, you know, either side of the body's head. So he knows that he can lay, from that he can work out which way the body is facing. And I may have straightened the body out as well, because sometimes, quite often, we find with bodies, they're on their back and both their legs and their arms are raised up, almost like they're, I suppose if they were on their front, they'd be sort of kneeling in a sort of a dog-like position, but they're on their back, so their legs and arms are drawn up. And the reason is that as the oxygen leaves the body, the muscles contract, so both legs and arms tend to raise up. It's quite an unusual thing, but certainly that's what happened with a lot of them. So I may have straightened the body out if they were in an awkward position and cleared any obstructions around them. Then I'm kneeling either side of the head. So my standby diver coming down knows that they can lay the body tray beside me and beside the body, so that the body's running. So they'll then go to the feet. They'll be able to use their hands to sort of walk down the body effectively and get to the feet. Once they're in position, we'll try and communicate with radio comms between the two divers. We lift the body into the tray and then we clip the seat belts over top of the body. Now, again, that all sounds straightforward, but remember, you cannot see anything. You're doing everything by touch. And on the surface, what seems easy, like, oh, I'll just get the two ends of this seatbelt and I'll clip them together, you now cannot see anything. It's all done by touch. And obviously bodies come in different shapes and sizes. You know, some are tiny, some are huge, you know, some are fat, some are thin, tall, short, muscular. So all these have issues in terms of getting seatbelts over people to sort of to clip them in. But once the body is secure in the tray, the standby diver now leaves me, goes back up my lifeline to get to the surface, and is given the body cover, which is a very large elasticated cover that will completely go over that tray and anybody that's in it. So they come back down to me, they feel their way down the lifeline, down to my armpit. It's all very personal, this, there's lots of hands on, both with each other, diver-wise, and the body, because it's the only way you can figure out, what's going on in the total dark. And before you go, oh, why didn't you use a torch? I think we've covered this before. It's my pet hate. No torch penetrates this darkness. It just doesn't work. It's just so full of black sediment. It's total blackout. It doesn't matter what you do. Most powerful torch in the world, turn it on, hold it an inch from your eye and point it straight at your eye. You will not see it. So the standby diver comes back down with the cover. They pass me one end of the cover. They grab the other end, and then we stretch it over the body. And then eventually we'll give the signal to raise the body. There'll be a line attached to the stretcher that now has the body on it, which is covered, and then both divers come up. And the idea is that in terms of dignity and the emotions that are definitely running high on the surface for the family, like I said, they do not want to see us breaking surface with their loved one tucked under our arm. They'll go in this tray, they'll have the cover on, and when we come up to the surface, they will just see a stretcher that has a cover stretched, across it. It's as dignified as we can get, but you can imagine we still had all sorts of terrible, scenes and emotions when that person arrives on the scene. However, the supervisor will have already warned them. It won't be a surprise. If I was a supervisor, I'd be going to the family and saying, look, there's no easy way of saying this. They found a body. We're pretty sure it's your son. They are just putting him in a stretcher and covering him, and then he'll be coming to the surface. So, of course, you wouldn't, have it as a surprise. That would be pretty terrible. So, yeah, it's a difficult one. And the only time it would differ is if we were rural, if we were remote, because bearing in mind we did mutual aid to other forces, so we could find ourselves in the back end of Nowheresville, on a small river, with absolutely no one around apart from a few cows watching us, maybe, no family about, just us. Obviously, that whole body tray cover thing takes time. And if your diver is reaching the end of their dive, then, have they got enough time left in terms of staying at depth and all the rest of it? There's various considerations. We want to then get that body up quite quickly. With no one else about at all, we would do the sort of unconventional, I'm just going to bear hug them. I'm literally going to put my arm around their chest and then give a signal and be slowly pulled to the surface by the attendant with the unfortunate victim just tucked under my arm effectively. Now, that does bring a few horror stories with it, and certainly I've been in the scenario when we've recovered bodies like that, that it's difficult to tell which way around they are. You just grab them any way you can, as long as you've got a really good hold around their chest and get brought to the surface. But certainly when you're coming up from depth, it's not unusual to have their face effectively banging against your dive mask as you're being brought to the surface. So for some people, that would be the stuff of nightmares. And we'll just talk about that, how I felt about, sort of recovering bodies. Now, we did a lot of training with something we called Dead Fred, which was basically a 14-stone dummy. So it was a realistic weight, and it didn't float, it sunk, so we could train with it for doing this body recovery as I've just described. Now, to me, I never knew the people I was recovering. And it is harder when you've got family there, because you want to, recover their loved one for them. But for me, I became quite remote from it. And these people that I was recovering, in my mind, they weren't really people. They were just Dead Freds. They were just mannequins. I'd recover Dead Fred on a training exercise the same way I would recover another body. For me, you can't get too tied up into it thinking this is a person, this is a living, breathing person with family. They're a son, a brother, a mum, a dad. You can't think like that. I think if you did think like that, you would probably be a basket case, of which I came close to on a couple of occasions, which again we'll deal with a bit later. So for me, they just weren't a real person. They were just a mannequin, and that's how I dealt with it. Others may have felt differently and dealt with it differently, for sure. Now, we'll just talk about water samples as well. Quite often, we would be asked to take water samples from where we'd recovered a body, and we would be asked to take bottom samples of water, mid-water, and surface samples, and that would be to recover what's called diatoms. Now, I'm not a scientist, so this is my understanding of what they are. I'm hoping I'm not getting this wrong. These are microscopic algae that are in the water, that are present in every water course, right across the world. Doesn't matter whether it's salt water, fresh water, sewage water, whatever it is, it has diatoms in. Now, apparently, they're really quite unique to each individual area. So by us taking water samples from where we recover the body, the scientist boffin types will be able to tell us various things. Has that body been dumped there after they died? Because if they find different diatoms in their lungs, for example, they might say, yes, they were drowned, but not in the water there. So there's all sorts of things can be gained from it. But certainly these diatoms are vital to the investigation and the scientists going forward in trying to establish what has happened to that person. Was it a swimming accident? Were they murdered and then, dumped in the water there? Various, other things can be established from them. So that was really important as well, recovering those, water samples for going forward. Okay, I think we'll call it there. I know I promised a couple of other things, but don't worry, they'll be in the next one. So hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found it interesting. Obviously a pretty, pretty sad subject for sure. Something definitely in the police and as a diver, very much so, you get used to. It just becomes your bread and butter for sure. Thanks for the downloads this week. Been fantastic. Had a real uptake in downloads, particularly on YouTube. Don't forget you can post questions on YouTube. So you if there's something specifically you want to know or make a comment, ideally a nice one, but feel free to say whatever you want. It won't upset me. Yeah, really good download. So thank you for that. And we'll be back next week with what will that be? That'll be episode 56, I think, next week. So we're certainly getting on. Thanks very much. Take it easy. Speak soon. Cheers. Bye.